Good morning, Nolan, Bitcoiner. Another episode of The Breakup, a show where we contrast our relationship with money. Everyone's in a relationship with money. And here we talk a little bit more about that relationship, our relationship with the US dollar, and we contrast it with a potential newcomer in money, Bitcoin, money for everyone. So it's really about the psychology engine behind money. Our relationship with money helps perpetuate that thing forward. And that's what the economy is, more or less, right? It's not math, even though we're dealing with numbers, it's a psychology engine. And the psychology engine is really important in predicting where the economy is going to go. The psychology used for individual choices, for policies, and what we're going to talk a bit about today, megapolitics, have a lot to do with that psychology engine. So yesterday I tried to give a definition of megapolitics and it didn't go very well. So I decided to make the opening of today's episode a better explanation. So I took time to figure out how to explain it. I thought I used the word so much, I just thought I knew how to define it and was not great. And I just written something about it yesterday, so it didn't come out great. So what I want to do today is compare these things a little more accurately with something that's succinct and I think helps you. And then I'll put it in context and contrast what we're seeing yesterday in the news, because there was lots of announcements that have a certain megapolitical nature to them. So I'll underline those. Here's a brief description, I think a helpful one, of what megapolitics are. The reason why I'm talking so much about megapolitics now is it's a major theme of this book, The Sovereign Individual, which many people in Bitcoin think is a predictive model and has done really well. It was written in the 1990s. It has done really well to predict the world we're in today. A big part of this show is predictions, because we like to make predictions. And the basic idea is your worldview at the time you made your prediction is useful, especially if it's right. Wrong or right, both useful. But if you see the prediction happened or didn't happen, what you do is you go back to the pieces, the thoughts, the threads you use to make that prediction, and you correct them. If you're right, you have less correction. Usually there's still some, but the goal really is to alter and protect, change, adjust your worldview so that it's more able to accurately reflect what's going on in the world, and then therefore make strong, accurate predictions. So here's a little heuristic that I use to understand megapolitics. And it actually comes from a distinction I make for politics here, which are not the same as microeconomics. People say microeconomics and macroeconomics. I often say that macroeconomics are just politics. They shouldn't even be divided between micro and macroeconomics. In truth, there's economics and there's politics. We're going to describe today what megapolitics are, but let's first just call macroeconomics what they are, politics. So microeconomics is really just individual choices. Do I want to buy a Coke, or do I want to buy a sugar-free Coke, or do I want to eat Whole Foods, or do I want to eat whatever, right? It's just trends, tastes, consumption habits. It's the individual choices that you need to make the economy go forward. Now, we call it macroeconomics. It's more like politics. And these parts are not individual choices around consumption. These are individual or larger policy choices that political parties make, institutions that form the government make. So we hear that often about interest rates. We hear it about unemployment numbers, the budget. All of these we consider macroeconomics. You can use the word politics and it should substitute almost exactly. Now, megapolitics, I like to define it beyond choices. There are several large megapolitical trends, thrusts in history, and the book Sovereign Individual underlines the four most important. They're climate, microbes, topography a little, I didn't mention it here, but it's one of them, and then finally technology. The example that's used in the Sovereign Individual to focus on defining megapolitics is the invention of the printing press. So in the 1500s, it was a huge change. And it didn't make individual choices. Do I give money to this church or that church to solve XYZ hunger problem, housing problem, whatever it was? At the time, the institutions all went to the church and lords to help solve those problems. The argument the Sovereign Individual made was when the printing press was invented, it totally recalibrated those. So the decisions were no longer, do I give money to the church? It's, What do I do with my newfound freedom? What do I do with my newfound knowledge that I got from this boon of a printing press? They argued in the 1990s that the internet was a similar megapolitical trend, and that it would change the world in ways that they could predict because it was eliminating some aspects of macroeconomics and therefore some of the decisions we need to make in the economy around economics. So if it strips away some of the policy choices because they don't exist anymore, then it will definitely affect how individual choices are made in the economy. So this brings us to yesterday. Yesterday we had Jerome Powell mentioning a big update, a big macroeconomic political policy update, focusing on some policy choices that are in his purview, in particular interest rates, a huge macroeconomic lever. He'd been saying for a long time that inflation was transitory. That was put to rest yesterday. It's not transitory, it's here for a little while. They mentioned a bit about, Jerome Powell mentioned a bit about his plans to solve it, some policies, right? Raise interest rates next year at a certain time, and then have certain periods where they predict they'll be raising interest rates. So what ended up happening with these two policy announcements, right? Big trouble. Most people had already predicted it wasn't temporary, right? And in the end, when you hear enough conversation around just policies, they can kind of sound hollow. Because when we look at it, not one of these political choices are really going to solve inflation as we see it, right? So you can say you're going to raise interest rates, but the capacity to solve things that way are not really there anymore. If you take the 1980s, the same playbook that was used to solve inflation back then, well, the United States debt compared to its GDP were very different. It was about 40%, the country's debt to the GDP. That means it would only have taken about a half a year, not even, for the US government to theoretically erase that debt. Now it's over 100%. So it couldn't happen this year. It would take several years of not having any services just to service that debt. Of course, the interest rates on the debt itself are much higher. So any raising of that as a policy is just going to create more of the same burden. So they don't really go together. Inflation is a better way to get rid of the debt burden for the government, but that doesn't solve a consumer's problem. In the end, that will still be in this microeconomic level area. The White House added to that, well, maybe it's the greedy beef packers, the meat packers. Well, that would ignore COVID, that would ignore supply chains, all those other policies. But what of those policies? Will any of those fix inflation? Will it be supply chains? Probably not. Right? It looks like the supply chain issue already went away. It was a big problem a few months ago and was often cited as the reason for inflation, but it looks like, I'll give credit where credit is due, the Biden administration might have figured that out. It looks like the port of LA is cleared for now. Another problem could come, I'm not certain. But it looks like it's gone. Now, the reason why it's important. So housing bubbles, they say, can cause the inflation. That's another COVID piece. That's the money getting printed again. But the real issue here is that microeconomics choices are becoming more difficult. Will policies fix them? My argument is no. I'm making a prediction as a Bitcoiner that none of these policies, not interest rates, not fixing supply chains, not housing policies, none of it, not new minimum wage, none of that's going to help. No individual policy any longer can help these things. Now it's megapolitical. Inflation itself has risen to the level of megapolitics. The thrust of it, globalization, every country more or less using the US dollar, the euro dollar. I don't mean euros. A lot of people get this confused. Euro dollars are not euros. They're the dollars that the rest of the world holds because the US dollar is the global reserve currency. So that's US dollars that are not in US. They're all around the world. So all of these dollars exist with people who are independent of US policy and are free to make their own microeconomic choices with what they do with their money. They can invest it in whatever they feel like. So indeed, it's become mega political. The US dollar itself is mega political, right? Let's not forget fiat money is an incredible invention when it came out. Entropy set in, and it now looks like the levers that were obvious control mechanisms for fiat money don't work as well. Right? That's what we're saying, that the macroeconomic levers, taxation, interest rates, none of those things have the power to control the mega political thrust the US dollar and inflation find it in today. So mega politics beyond choices. Well, what forces are beyond choices that can help solve these problems? Climate change, that's its own problem, right? And it's certainly a mega political issue, but not really one that we're going to solve through macroeconomic policies today. Maybe energy policies, but that's another issue. And we talk about that a lot on the show, nuclear energy, and in particular, Bitcoin's capacity to be a private buyer and private developer of nuclear power is one of the main reasons why I'm so enthusiastic about the future of Bitcoin and why it is a mega political thread that can't be discounted very easily. The next two, microbes, we're dealing with that right now. There's no doubt that the mega political factors around COVID's a real pandemic. The responses I have a ton of problem with, but there's no doubting that people get COVID. I had COVID in 2020, January, before it was really an issue. And even that was before there was any media hype about how dangerous it was. I had a feeling it was dangerous beforehand. And when a lot of people in New York City, I was living in New York City at the time, got it. We already in January 2020 knew you didn't go on the subway when you had it. You'd get sort of yelled at. I stayed home the days I had it before there was any fear around spreading it, exactly how bad it was. But no doubt about it, the microbes, bacteria, in this case, a virus, certainly a mega political thread, certainly affecting all of our policies and choices. But the one that's relevant for what we're talking about today is technology. What we have here for our money is a series of political choices that were made in order to basically invent a type of money, fiat currencies. And they're a coordination of political forces that are the judiciary, the court system, law enforcement, anyone who's going to enforce a contract, obligations, and responsibilities between two parties, as the policies that go into directing the money between banks, commercial banks, and the Reserve Bank, and the interest rates that are used to for all of these interactions and commercial relationships. So all of these are a construct of a million different institutions coordinating together. The technological innovation behind Bitcoin simply removes all of that complexity and makes the relationship much more simple, kind of an off-the-shelf, almost like canning soup, but for money. So instead of having all kinds of people making different recipes for complicated vegetable soups and everyone contributes, that farmer brings a bit, this guy brings a bit, that person brings a bit. In the case of Bitcoin, they've really just canned it and it's off the shelf. And the participants who are already in the network, running the nodes, running the machines, have already adopted all of these political questions around Bitcoin. Supply, the rate of increase, all of those things are already determined. So there is no debate about them because people wouldn't have joined the network if they weren't more or less willing to live with the conditions of the network, and then the network conditions are really hard to change. So it's resistant to change from any one party. What ends up happening is the mega political forces behind Bitcoin can behave as a counterbalance to the mega political forces of inflation. So in the same way that these policy levers can't really solve inflation any longer, the problem is just too big, Bitcoin offers a direction and a technology that can help soften the blow of the failure of some of these policies. And if we're going to make a prediction, as we often do in this show, or a major part of this show is to make predictions ourselves and then go back and test them. A major idea that we have here is that because Bitcoin is a mega political force, because it can't be shut down, because it is not going to be burdened by debates around whether it was the cow farmers or what is the optimal rate of increase or inflation of the currency or any of these other questions, they're not an issue in Bitcoin. Bitcoin simply behaves as a savings technology where you're immune, theoretically immune, from the ravages of inflation, from the destructive ability of inflation to tear down your life savings and to waste time you've already spent accumulating wealth. So the prediction here is more or less that if you look at the old world, if you look at the levers, right, that's why we call the show The Breakup. It isn't about working through your problems with this entity you're in a relationship with, money, right? We're in a relationship with money. It isn't about solving the problems and going to counseling. Counseling's not going to solve this thing anymore. It's way past counseling. It's divorce, right? It's breaking up and starting new, being happy. Now, I'm a big believer in family, and I have beautiful children, a beautiful wife. As a person, I'm not looking for divorce, and I've never broken up with really anyone in my life. I've been with my wife for a long time, and we have a lovely family. But I do see people going through relationship breakups, and I find the mindset of a breakup much more applicable to what's going on with Bitcoin and the US dollar than trading dollars for Bitcoin. It's not enough. It's about leaving behind even the notion that these can be fixed by a little adjustment here or a little adjustment there. I don't think they can. That's why I do this show. That's why I save Bitcoin. And that's why I hope to be a resource to anyone who is going through this breakup right now and has questions. I try to put a frame every single day that underlines why you need to break up and why there are healthier relationships that you can enter into with your money, and ones that will definitely bring you a lot more joy and a lot more fulfillment. That's everything for today, guys. See you next time.